Hey, everybody, it's Tracy Brown from Intentional Inclusion and Stained Glass Spirit. And I'm so glad to be with you this month and in this episode. This idea of the secret fears of LGBTQ plus champions is something I wanted to share because I wanted to do something a little different for Pride Month 2023. It's so easy to, throughout the month, feature individual people who self-identify as LGBTQ plus and the achievements they've made and the contributions they are making. And a lot of times we will have special events and they're valuable too. But I wanted to do something a little more educational this year. And so I just began thinking about what are some of the topics that might be helpful. And a few months ago, I was in a conversation with a client organization, and we were talking about how to help their LGBTQ plus employee resource group, ERG, be more effective and grow and thrive. And in those conversations and in the focus groups I did and in the interviews that I did, I was surprised how much I was hearing from people about the reasons they were hesitant to jump in and attend events, or the reasons they um, felt cautious about being an ally, or what I prefer to refer to as a champion. And I remembered that it seemed like a lifetime ago that it was such a big issue. And I went back and I was finding some work that I had done 15 years ago around the secret fears of LGBTQ plus allies. And I was shocked at how similar the comments were. I mean, like really shocked. Like, have we made no progress? And so I pulled that work out and a little bit ago, and I started asking people today, in 2023, I started asking people, what is it that motivates you to support LGBTQ plus events and efforts and programs and activities? And what is it that makes you hesitate? And I was using the word hesitate, or I was using the word reluctant. And in people's responses, they were using the word fear and afraid, and sometimes hesitant. So that's the foundation underneath this conversation that I want to have with you. I'm realizing it's still very important to address some pretty basic needs. And with all of the progress that's been made and with all of the visibility that has occurred over the last 10 years, especially related to LGBTQ plus concerns, opportunities, and issues, we still have to go back to the basics. So this is a 4-part series. And in this first part of the series, I am going to focus on what contributes to fear, what contributes to the reluctance, what contributes to the hesitancy that people have in speaking up, in getting engaged, in being involved. And these are not just my observations. Much of what I will share with you actually came from the mouths of others who I interviewed or talked with or conducted focus groups. And so the question that I often ask is this one: Why are you afraid or reluctant to be known as a champion for LGBTQ plus events? Or why are you afraid or reluctant to be known as an LGBTQ plus champion? And the two most common responses, literally, the two most common responses were, people will think I'm gay, or people will think I'm one of those letters. And this comment came from people who do self identify in the spectrum, in the LGBTQ plus spectrum, almost as much as it came up from people who are straight or cisgender. Almost. So I would say, at least from the people who I know or who identified in the course of the conversation that they were a member of or part of the LGBTQ plus spectrum or identity group, I would say that it was 60-40, that 40% of the people who shared these reasons why they were hesitant were members of the group themselves. And that's just something interesting to note, because in so many cases, we assume that our environments are quote unquote safe places for people to be who they are or to be known as who they are. And that's not necessarily the way that the employees in our workplace or the neighbors in our community feel. So the two most frequently responded comments about fears or reluctance. Why are you afraid? Number one, people will think I'm gay or one of the other groups within the spectrum. And number two, I'm not an expert on this. I'm not an expert on the issues. I'm not an expert on what it means to be LGBTQ plus. I'm not an expert. And so those two things, it's really interesting and important to know, because in whatever you're doing, you are going to have to address those two. Those two came up so much. I was surprised. So people were concerned that people might identify them as LGBTQ, and that the impact, because my question was, okay, so you're afraid that people will think that, you're LGBTQ. So why is that a problem? And they said, well, it might slow my progress. Like I might not get the promotions I want. Or some people I know, they've been very vocal about their concerns or their beliefs or their values. And so I might lose some relationships with people I need in order to get ahead, or people in my community where I won't feel safe. My boss will be uncomfortable. This came up in focus groups in the workplace quite a bit. And in the community as well as in the workplace, I heard people say, well, you know, it's not so much that I'm hiding, but I'm not going to be out in a visible way because they're members of my family who would be really uncomfortable. Related to, I'm not an expert on this issue or on this topic. What came up a number of times was, I'm not an expert. And so I might say something that's offensive. I might say the wrong thing, or I don't want people to start thinking of me as if I'm the spokesperson for the LGBTQ plus community. Another reason that people said that, I'm hesitant because I'm not really an expert, and, I know a lot about race and ethnicity, but I don't know so much about sexual orientation or gender identity. So, I'm just gonna stay away, or I'm just gonna keep my head down, or I'm just gonna, be behind the scenes. So those are the two most common. People will think I'm LGBTQ plus, and it will have a negative impact. Two, I'm not an expert, so it's not for me to speak. The other two that came up almost as frequently as I would be uncomfortable or it's not my primary agenda. I'd be uncomfortable if I went to events and there were people who were showing public displays of affection and same gender, or I'm not sure what their gender identity is. I would just be uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable because I don't want to be seen as a troublemaker at work and, putting a political agenda out in front of or as more important than my work. And a number of people, if I were the only straight person, I'd be really nervous. And then it's not my primary agenda. Like I come to work to do my job, or in the community, a number of people were like, I'm not into marches and demonstrations. And in their mind, that's what it would mean to be a champion or an ally. And quite a bit it would take time away from a focus that's more important to me personally. And this came up not only from cisgender folks, but from people who identify as LGBTQ plus, that, I know what my identity is and you know, I don't need to be advocating for that or be really involved because there are some other issues that are of greater concern to me. So I'm hoping that as you're hearing these top four reasons that people don't jump in to become known as a champion, that you're thinking about in your work environment or in your community or your professional association. How could you be responding to these concerns that people aren't telling you directly about, but it is driving their hesitance to jump in and get involved? People will think I'm LGBTQ. People might expect me to be an expert on this issue. I simply would be uncomfortable because of the visibility, and I might be out of my own element. And four, it's really not my primary agenda. There are some other issues or concerns that are more important to me. I also heard a pattern, and I've been hearing this pattern again. It was true 15 years ago, and I'm disappointed to know that it is still true now. There were some people who were pretty vocal about these other things. And with the first four, those were pretty much across the board, race, ethnicity, um, sexual orientation, gender identity, age groups and generations even. Those pretty much panned out. But there were four others that were a little different. And so what I found is when I asked people the question, why are you afraid or reluctant to be known as an LGBTQ champion? I would get a few other answers, and there was a pattern. So, from people of color, especially African American and Black, then there was a very common answer of there's no reciprocity. I know that there are people from all ethnic groups in the LGBTQ plus spectrum. However, as a Black person, folks in the LGBTQ spectrum who are passionate about that and planning events, they don't reciprocate. I didn't see them come out for Black Lives Matter. I didn't see them come and get involved in events that we were sponsoring. Number two, ethnically and socioeconomically exclusive. So again, those two are kind of related. That they were perceived that people who were running, leading, are being very visible around LGBTQ plus issues seem to be middle class, upper middle class white, and not that the folks who had visibility did not seem to represent the world, did not seem to represent many different ethnic groups, many different age groups, many different socioeconomic groups, etc. And so the sense of exclusivity, or what I often think of as unintentionally unwelcome, creating that kind of environment. And interestingly enough, this was not just from African Americans, this was from people from a variety of ethnic groups and age groups. The third thing that came out that seemed to be a pattern was from people who are identified as cisgender, as really, I don't want to be the token straight person. I don't want to be the one who shows up and, and then everybody's looking at me to speak for all straight people or all people who are cisgender. I just don't want to be that person. And then the fourth one was very interesting because it crossed a lot of lines as well. But the idea that the people who were leading the LGBTQ plus initiative, oh, they don't need my support, or they don't want my support because I don't look and talk like them. So these are concerns too that you want to really keep in mind as you are thinking about how do I expand the people who I invite to be champions for LGBTQ plus events, activities, and programs in this organization or in this community. So that's it for this first episode, this first part in the series. My goal today was really to give you some idea of what is it that contributes to fear, reluctance, and hesitancy for people being or becoming champions for inclusion. This is the first part of Secret Fears of LGBTQ plus champions. And every Wednesday in the month of June, I'll be dropping another episode, 15 to 20 minutes, to give you some ideas to think about. In the second episode, we'll be looking at how you can increase your comfort approaching potential champions, especially knowing what it is that may be causing hesitancy. Week 3, ideas for nurturing relationships with existing champions so that you can retain them longer and engage and inspire them. Week 4, trust, transformation, and long-term success. So this is where we're going over the 4 weeks of June, talking about and thinking about the secret fears of LGBTQ plus champions. My name is Tracy Brown, and I just hope that this is helpful for you as you are honoring Pride Month in 2023.